Luca Moretti moved with the gun tucked under his jacket and a calculated step that ate the carpet between the elevator and room 312. Doubt sat at the back of his throat before his hand found the brass knob. Doubt made his fingers colder than the night. He forced the thought down and counted his breath. 1, 2. The hallway light hummed above him, and the hotel's heating clicked in a pattern he knew by memory. Marco's voice had been a single line through the earpiece, "Finish it." And Luca had obeyed like a machine until the earpiece warmed on his skin and doubt crawled in. The immediate problem was simple and present. A woman in room 312 had become a liability to the family, and Luca had orders to remove that liability tonight. He had taken this kind of job for years with the same clinical motions: enter, assess, end, until something in the doorway slowed him. He was not thinking about the reward on the table. He was thinking about whether a single voice could change the angle of his wrist. He kicked the door twice. The deadbolt gave with a soft metallic click. The room smelled of boiled coffee and the faint lemon of housekeeping spray. A woman sat near the window, a worn leather satchel at her feet, a silver locket against her collarbone. She looked up with an expression that registered fear and a kind of stubborn, ordinary patience. Luca saw the small birthmark near her jawline. He saw the callus of someone who worked with her hands. He saw how she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was about to answer. "Don T move, Luca." His voice was low, steady. The sentence carried fewer syllables than a calendar. Emma Hayes blinked as if counting him among the room's objects. She kept both hands empty and visible. Okay. "Please, Don T, hurt me." Her voice was quiet and direct. Doubt pushed at his discipline again when she spoke the words that should be nothing. "I gave my lunch to a man who smelled like oil on the corner yesterday. He had a paper cut on his thumb and he kept thanking me." Luca's jaw tightened. The detail was so small it should have slid off him. It stayed. Marco's clipped voice over the earpiece sharpened him back into the present. "Luca." Status. Marco's tone had the flatness of habit and the edge of an order. Luca swallowed. He closed his hand around the gun. The cold metal reminded him of calculation. He stepped forward a measured pace and found his mouth making questions he did not intend to ask. Emma's eyes tracked him the way someone else's dog might track a returning owner, careful and assessing. "Who are you?" she asked. Her speech was plain. Luca kept his answer short. "Luca." He watched her face for any lie. When Emma him the name of the man who had accepted her sandwich, she said it like a small fact. Marcus Dean, maintenance at the corner garage. She did not explain why she had fed him. She did not apologize for her kindness. The moment of charity was a single human fact. That single human fact moved something in Luca's chest he had long taught himself to ignore. He keyed the earpiece and kept his reply to Marco measured. "I have the target." He did not say what he felt. Marco's voice tightened. "Finish it, Luca." No mercy, family rules. The breath in his words carried the weight of consequence. Luca lifted the gun and then set it on the bedside table with deliberate slowness. He felt the earpiece trimmer with static as Marco barked through it. "Don't, Emma." She kept her eyes on the gun. Please, Don T." The sentence was plain and the sound of it filled the space between them with a new kind of pressure. Luca felt a pivot inside him. Doubt shifted to a narrower, sharper fear. Fear of betraying the family he had served and fear of what refusing would bring. He had spent years cutting ties to everything that might slow him. Old friends, any attachments, the memory of a sister he had lost to accident. Tonight, the past did not appear as a metaphor. It came in a memory of a chipped teacup his mother had kept, and a late winter afternoon when she told him to do the right thing, even if it cost him. He did not want to be sentimental. He did not want to be the kind of man who lets small acts of kindness rearrange his commissures. "Luca," Marco pressed, "are you indecisive?" The question read like contempt. Luca did not answer. He crouched to check the window latch as if the motion required technical attention. He was buying a heartbeat. Emma's hand found the locket, and she turned it slowly. My sister used to tie notes into it when we were small. This was the last one. It says, "Come home when you are ready." She did not look for pity. She gave him a concrete piece of herself. Luca sensed a change in the room's measure. He tested the gun's weight and set it back down. That small reveal did what 100 words could not. It made the target into a person with a history that fit in an object he could hold. Luca's trained detachment met the physical evidence of a life. He thought for an instant of his own choices and the ledger he carried like a ledger of sins. He considered telling Marco he could not do it, and then imagined Marco's response, swift, devoid of pity, an immediate and professional erasure. The earpiece crackled with impatience. "Finish, Luca." Now, Marco's voice had pulled in the room like a net. Luca reached for his phone instead and typed 2 words he had not planned to send. "I can tea." He paused, thumb hovering, and then deleted it. He could not let written words decide what a whispered memory had begun. Marco's voice did not leave room for moral hesitation. "You owe the family, Luca. You chose this life. You do your job." His sentences were short. The urgency demanded compliance. Luca pushed himself into motion that was neither attack nor retreat. He moved to the doorway and closed it behind himself, then opened it a fraction to slide the bolt. The act made the hallway noise softer. The hotel's corridor became a separate world. He stepped back into the room and crouched near the window, not hiding but repositioning. "You stay where you are, Emma," he said. She nodded. Her hands trembled when she replaced the locket against her collarbone. "Yes, Luca." Her reply was a small piece of trust. Marco spoke through the earpiece again, and the sound sharpened into a sequence. Assurance, threat, impatience. "You do this and we all move on. You fail and you make trouble for everyone. You know me, Luca." Marco's voice narrowed into a warning. Luca's next decisions played out in action. He dug into his jacket and folded a worn hotel key card into his palm. He cleared the bedside drawers with a decisive sweep and stuffed clothes into a plastic bag. Emma to put on sensible shoes. He watched her fingers fumble with laces and found that watching this small, anxious ritual eased the tightness in his chest by turning it into useful motion. Outside, a truck idled at the curb and a door downstairs closed with a metallic clang. Those external sounds threaded through the room like deadlines. Every 3 minutes his watch buzzed with a calendar reminder he had set for no reason other than to count time. It was an anchor he had learned to use when decisions needed a timer. He set it and then cancelled it. He could not let a beep decide. "Marco, Luca at last." He spoke to the earpiece with a clipped clarity. "She won't be dead tonight." The sentence was compact. Marco's reply arrived like an electric jolt. "You hear me? Marco, you think you can disobey and walk away." Luca's hesitation snapped into a faster shift, doubt to protectiveness. He set the gun in a drawer, slid the drawer closed with a soft click, and carried Emma by the shoulders into the bathroom, where he lifted her through the skinny space and locked himself out into the service corridor. He moved with practical force, not tenderness. His hands were businesslike. He did not carry her like a lover. He carried her like someone evacuating a hazard. They moved through service corridors stacked with linen carts and maintenance doors, muffled lights, and a smell of bleach. Luca kept his back to the corridor wall and listened to the hotel, its mechanical breathing, the distant lift, the rush of an air conditioner. Marco's voice had gone quiet for the moment, but Luca knew silence could be a louder threat. In the stairwell he pushed Emma down a flight and into a narrow door labeled service exit. He jammed his shoulder and bent the metal bar until it gave. They tumbled into the alley behind the hotel, where a delivery van idled and a man with a cigarette cupped his hand around the flame. Luca's gloves left faint prints on the van's side. He pulled Emma forward and they ducked behind trash bins while the city kept breathing. Emma whispered, "Marco." Her voice had a single note of fear. "Are they?" Marco knows, Luca. He did not lie. He felt the engine of the van, the vibration under his feet. He felt the hair at his neck stand as if someone unseen had passed. The doubt had shifted again, from protectiveness to acute fear for both of them. He checked his phone and found a string of messages from Marco that read like a narrowing trap. A time, a place, a reminder. They moved faster after that. Luca took the satchel and shoved in the clothes he had taken from the drawer. Emma put the locket in her palm and did not hide it. Thank you. The sentence was brief, and its ordinariness made Luca aware of a life that had nothing to do with ledger books and deliverables. They returned to the hotel by a service elevator and climbed to the floor behind the kitchen where a back room stayed locked and used for temporary staff breaks. Luca forced the lock with a screwdriver and set a chair against the door. He was thorough in simple ways. He checked the heating vent for listening devices, he rewired the cheap lamp to stay on, and he moved a stack of boxes to create a narrow bed of crates. Emma listened to him, and when she spoke she used his name often. Luca. Can we? She stopped. She looked at his face for permission he had not planned to give. Luca answered with short sentences, each one measured. Stay here. Done. Open the door. If anyone calls, do not answer. If someone slips a note under the door, burn it or hide it. Marco can send people tonight. He will test loyalties. His speech was procedural. She watched him and then asked, Why? Why did you do this, Luca? The question landed like gravity. He considered 3 answers and chose the shortest one. I heard you. He did not expand. The words were small and heavy. Emma's face registered a speed of change, confusion, gratitude, then the ember of suspicion. Your name. But why would you risk Marco? Luca's mouth tightened. Answers would have to wait. Outside, footsteps came in timed steps down the corridor. Luca pressed himself against the stacked boxes and could feel the cardboard ridges bite into his palms. He listened to the carpeted thud of someone passing and the faint ring of a phone in the kitchen below. He felt each noise as an instrument measuring time. Marco's voice cut through the earpiece again, now calmer but with teeth. You left the room. Report. Marco paused and then added, Choose well, Luca. The sentence was not an instruction so much as a countdown. Luca extracted a cigarette from his inner pocket and did not light it. He tore the match in half and used the friction to set the lamp's filament to a softer glow, as if his fidget could shape the light. He watched Emma sleep on the crate mattress with her locket on her palm, eyes closed but jaw giving like someone holding breath. The sight translated into something he knew, an obligation not written in any family ledger. At 2 a.m, a maintenance worker hit the back door and saw when the chair scraped. Luca grabbed a crowbar and steadied himself. He set the chair carefully, moved the boxes back in front, and pretended the room had been left in its original disarray. The knock came again, firmer, room service. A man's voice called outside. Luca held his breath until his ribs pushed against his lung and the sound sharpened to an instrument. He moved to the door and whispered, Wait. Do not answer. Emma's hand tightened on the locket so hard the silver thread creaked. She obeyed. Luca eased the door open an inch and peered through the crack. 2 men in plain coats stood in the kitchen corridor. One with a square face, one with a thin scar on his cheek. They spoke in quick Italian that Luca understood and then paused. The square-faced man scuffed his shoe against the threshold and then crouched to check the lock. He slipped a business card under the door as if it were an ordinary delivery. The card read, We know, a small paper threat meant to test fear. The card's arrival acted as the mid-chapter pinprick. Luca swore softly. He looked at Emma and saw that she had gone pale. He opened the door a hair more and took the card, then stepped back and held it between 2 fingers. He did not crumple it yet. The men's shoes receded. Behind the cardboard, Marco's messages came in shorter, sharper bursts. Luca answered with single words. The dialogue with Marco became a confrontation of wills in compressed sentences. Marco pressing, Luca deflecting. Then Marco threatened names that Luca had once respected. Luca had to respond. He swore and then typed a place and a time that would send a false trail, a decoy designed to buy them hours. When he finished, he looked at Emma. She sat on the crate and watched him type as if watching an unfamiliar ritual. "Marco will come tomorrow," she said. "He will want me gone." Her voice stayed level. Luca felt his jaw clench. He had bought time. He had not solved the ledger. They slept in fits. Luca took turns with watch shifts, listening for stair noises, feeling each hiss of vent pipe as evidence. He mapped the hotel staff movements in his head. Which door slammed at 3, which lift hummed, which cleaning cart clattered. He paced and did not speak for long stretches. When he did speak, his sentences were commands and her replies were questions. Emma, how he had learned to move like that. Luca did not answer. He her instead to eat a sandwich and to hide the locket inside a shoe. She obeyed without comment. At dawn, Luca stood by the narrow window and watched a cab drop 2 men 3 floors above. He felt the metal ring of guilt and the slow burn of a choice he had made. Doubt had come first. It had shifted to protectiveness and then to fear. Now it rested in a new place, resolve. He had refused the hit, and that refusal had produced consequences he would now meet. Marco called one last time before the morning staff arrived. His voice had a cold calm and he said, "You know what happens next, Luca. Decide now." Luca looked at Emma, at the locket open to a yellowed scrap of paper inside, at the way she breathed. He felt the ledger settle in his palm like a physical book. He placed the brass key of the service room on the desk beside the lamp and tapped the wooden surface twice. He did not pretend this would end anything. He had not tied up loose ends. But he had moved a life from a doorway to a locked room. A car door slammed outside very near, then a second slam 3 floors up. Luca tightened the strap on his gloves and slid the key into his pocket. He to Emma in a voice that held both instruction and an unshared promise, "Stay, do not open. If anyone asks for your name, tell them nothing," she answered with 2 words, "I want tea." He left the back room and braced himself against the corridor wall, listening for the first clear sign that the night's choice had broken the surface of the day. A radio in the kitchen clicked on. A delivery bell rang faintly. He exhaled slow and then stepped into the stairwell to check the floors above. The situation had shifted from immediate survival to a hard, watchful waiting. The chapter's conflict, his refusal and the scramble that followed, had reached a temporary resolution. Emma was alive and hidden. The next move would come from Marco and from the family. Luca slid the brass key into his pocket and locked the service room door with a practiced hand. The metal latch snapped into place. He listened to the echo of his own footsteps as he moved away and heard, very close, the thud of a car door 3 floors up. Luca froze with his hand still inside his jacket. Doubt tightened his throat the way a gloved hand might clamp a pulse. He had stepped through the doorway intending to finish a job, and within 1 sentence from the woman on the bed his certainty cracked. Her voice was plain and steady. "There's a key under the lamp." That line stopped him more surely than any bullet would have. He counted the sounds that followed. The electric hum of the corridor, the distant elevator bell, the soft rustle of the bedsheet when the woman turned. Doubt sat under his ribs and pushed his fingers away from the gun. He had arrived at the hotel the night before, with the barrel pressed to his ribs, and the carpet measure between the elevator and room 3. 1, 2 still fresh in his memory. The prior night's step, the one recorded in his head, hung there like a ledger he couldn't see close. Luca took 1 slow breath and then another. He himself, the order was simple. Get in, finish it, leave. Marco had said those words twice that afternoon over a cigarette and a tinny phone line. Luca heard Marco now through the earpiece as if the sound were a hand tapping a table. Confirm. Marco's voice was flat and short. Confirm the target. Move. The command tightened the line of Luca's mouth. He listened to the woman's next sentence. Her words were not frantic. They named objects. A low brass lamp, a leather satchel on the chair, the chipped saucer with a coffee ring. She spoke as if she were cataloguing a small room, not announcing her life to an intruder. Luca's doubt shifted into hesitation. He eased off the doorway and let the hallway's shadow keep him half hidden. Emma had not seen him. She had a plain braid thrown over her shoulder and a thin silver locket at her throat. Luca watched how her fingers moved when she said the last line, quick, efficient, like someone repeating a shopkeeper's routine. That movement lodged in his mind. She touched the locket, thumbed the clasp, and then looked up toward the door without turning her body. Luca read trust in the angle of her head. The trust did not belong in the thing he had been hired to extinguish. He rehearsed explanations in his mouth and discarded them. He could say he was room service. He could claim to be maintenance. He could improvise a role and leave with the job done. Marco's voice in his ear would not tolerate inventions. Still, Luca weighed each option by the way Emma's voice folded across the mattress and named an ordinary detail. Something in that ordinary steadied him. It made killing into a rumor rather than a deed. An urgent pressure arrived through the earpiece. Marco's cadence hardened. Now, Luca, we don't have time for. Marco left the sentence to land. Luca answered with nothing but a measured inhale, and that silence spoke louder than words. He felt the second emotion shift then. Hesitation moved into protective focus. He stepped across the threshold without the gun leaving its place under his coat. Inside the room the air smelled of stale coffee and citrus soap. The lamp threw a warm pool of light that gilded Emma's hair. Luca kept his shoulders angled, one foot behind the other, and let his hands remain where he could reach them. He did not want her to see his watch or his ring. He had no plan to explain his face. Evening, Luca's voice was low. He folded the words into a neutral shape. Emma blinked and then smiled in a way that made her dimple show. Evening, she answered. Her voice kept the same steady cadence, which flummoxed Luca more than a shout would have. He stepped closer and pretended to adjust the lamp. He touched the brass base and felt the residual heat. He watched Emma tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. He observed the precise motion she used when nervous. He noticed the birthmark near her jawline. He listened to the sentence she chose next. I didn't lock the door, because I thought you might come back, she said. And then she laughed at her own remark, like someone explaining a small, silly habit. Marco's words in the earpiece demanded a quick report. Luca's hesitation hardened into a plan he had not intended to make. He into the tiny mic. Room clear, subject awake. No sign of company, Marco responded with a breath that carried impatience. Move her. Now that single order separated the man Luca was from the man he wanted to be. Luca felt the third emotion shift. Protective focus curved into a thin, fierce resolve. He could not tell why Emma's voice had the power to reassign his loyalties, only that it had. He did not have to like the reason. He had to act on it. He himself that the delay would cost him nothing if it kept her alive. He himself that for 3 heartbeats until the sound of running steps outside the room made the decision immediate. He moved with the practiced economy of someone who knew how to handle bodies. He improvised a role. I'm with security, he said, stepping around the bed. Emma's eyes widened and she straightened. She did not resist. When she offered him the small leather satchel, he took it and felt the worn strap cut into his palm. Inside was a thin notebook and a fountain pen with a cracked cap. He did not touch them. He kept his focus on her hands. Luca. Marco barked through the earpiece. Luca answered with the name. I am moving her now, he said. He spoke using Marco's name to anchor the command in the room where he stood. Marco's reply was immediate and cold. Hurry, the hallway noise surged closer. A keycard beeped in the corridor. Voices. Leather soles on tile. Luca hustled Emma into the narrow service corridor that ran behind the hotel rooms. The corridor smelled of bleach and engine oil. He led her by the elbow and kept his body between her and the door. The men in the corridor carried flashlights and heavy coats. One of them knocked into a metal cart and cursed. Luca kept his steps small. He could hear Marco counting in shorthand through the earpiece. Marco wanted proof. Marco wanted to see whether Luca would follow orders without question. At the corridor's far end, a grey-faced man paused and peered down the run of doors. A second man held a radio that crackled. Luca slowed and pushed a service elevator call. He always found the elevator button too warm, as if someone else had used it minutes before. When the doors opened, the metal box smelled like oil and old wet coats. Luca ushered Emma inside and pressed the close button. His hands brushed hers. She flinched. He felt her fingers tremble. The elevator descended. Luca held himself so that his weight shadowed her. He gave her a choice with his face and with his hands. "You can run when it opens," he said. Emma's eyes slid to his. "Run where?" she asked. Her voice contained a practical clarity. Luca answered by sliding a simple leather card across the pocket of his suit, an anonymous hotel maintenance pass he had pulled from a pocket earlier. He did not ask her name. At the basement level, Luca opened the elevator and moved fast for the service exit. They emerged into a dim corridor where the emergency lights hummed. Marco's voice cracked over the earpiece once more. Controlled anger now threaded through it. "I said move her. Where is she?" Luca ignored the edge and kept walking. He led Emma down a stairwell that smelled of concrete and damp paint. He wanted to put one stair between her and Marco's men, and another between himself and the order. A figure stood at the bottom of the stairwell. Marco himself filled the landing and did not look surprised. Marco's coat was heavy and water-specked. His eyes were small and hard. He had that permanent scowl folded into his face like a map. "Luca." "Marco." He did not add a greeting. This wasn't about a clean hit. Marco continued, and the words cut like a file. He reached into his coat and produced no weapon. Only the plain gold wedding band on his finger glinted in the emergency light. Luca felt betrayal as a physical thing, a cold pressure behind the sternum that made his steps catch. Marco's words were not orders anymore. They were a test announced in the open. "Marco, we offered you a choice. You chose wrong." Luca's resistance flickered. Emma stepped forward as if to protest, but Luca put his hand on her shoulder and stopped her. Get out of the way." His voice was steady, shorter than a threat. He used Marco's name to keep the confrontation personal. Marco's expression hardened. He tapped the side of his jaw with a finger. "I don't want to kill you, Luca. I want to see whose side you take." 3 men appeared behind Marco, heavy, shouldered and patient. They had the look of people used to being given simple tasks. The corridor narrowed with their presence. Luca held Emma behind him and saw the pen in her satchel shift when she breathed. "Talk, Marco." "Luca." He kept his shoulders loose and his jaw working. He needed to buy time and to find a path through the noise. Marco answered with an instruction that meant betrayal by design. "Take her out of the building. If you refuse, you know what's next. Prove me wrong." Marco's voice had the brittle patience of a ledger being balanced. Luca did not move. He looked once at Emma. He watched the way the lamp light had left a gold curve on her cheek. This is where his resolve hardened into action. He stepped forward and shoved the closest man backward with a palm between collarbone and shoulder. The man stumbled and swore. That shove broke the polite distance that kept men like Marco from touching one another. The corridor turned violent in an instant. Marco's men surged. Luca met them with the efficiency of someone who had trained for such collisions. He blocked a punch, twisted an arm, and used the narrow space to pin 2 men against a cinder block wall. The scuffle made a dry, metallic thump against the handrail. Emma screamed once, and that sound crystallized Luca's aim. He would not hand her over. The fight was brief and physical. Luca's coat slashed the air. He felt a jolt of pain when a boot caught his shin. He tasted copper on the edge of his tongue when a fist grazed his lip. He kept naming actions in his head like a mechanic reciting steps. Grab, twist, disarm, protect. His decisions were muscle memory layered over a new intention. During the scuffle, Marco moved to the stairwell's landing and shouted orders. "Hold him." "Take the bag!" The words made men split and decide. One of them lunged for Emma's satchel. Luca turned and kicked the hand away. The bag hit the concrete and spilled a small, battered notebook. The pages fluttered but did not reveal anything more than a list of names and a smudged receipt from a diner. Emma crouched to retrieve the notebook. Wait, Luca. It's nothing, just... Oh, her voice cut off because a man grabbed her elbow. Luca snapped his head and saw the pressure on her forearm. He moved so that his shoulder knocked the man and loosened the grip. Emma's chin lifted. She looked at him the way someone looks at a rescuer who will not leave. There were 8 quick lines of exchange as orders, accusations, and names flew. "Luca!" Marco yelled, "Let her go!" Marco stepped back. Luca grabbed his arm. One of the men said, "Release her!" Emma shouted, and her voice was clean and sharp. The back and forth lasted less than 10 seconds, but rearranged where each man stood and who could still breathe easily. At the climax on the landing, Luca intercepted a knife aimed for his gut. He twisted and took the blade's edge along his palm. He felt heat bloom along his skin and tasted iron. He did not cry out. He had learned early how to keep sound from carrying a truth. He used the knife's momentum to throw the attacker into the stair railing. Marco watched and for a moment let the calculation show on his face. The men hesitated. That pause gave Luca the room to pull Emma back into the stairwell and press her against a service door. He checked the cut on his palm with a thumb and then tied a strip of his handkerchief around it. There was no dramatizing the wound. He wanted the bandage practical and quick. The fight left the stairwell with 2 men on the floor and 4 retreating past the landing. Marco did not leave. He backed slowly and folded his hands in front of him. "Marco, you made a choice, Luca. You chose to make yourself a target." There was no triumph in the words. Only a ledger being finished. Luca's next decision would have consequences beyond this stairwell. He stepped forward and placed his palm on Marco's shoulder. He did not seek permission, and he did not ask for a truce. "I chose differently, Marco. I want to be part of this." His voice was an edge. Marco's smile was small and empty. He turned and moved down the corridor as if leaving a chessboard mid-game. Before he vanished into the dim, he touched his radio and said, "Withdraw. We'll meet again." Marco's retreat was formal. Luca watched him go and felt the change in the room, like a door clicking shut. After Marco left, Luca led Emma back to the hotel room. The bed smelled faintly of detergent and nicotine. He closed the door and leaned the bolt before he sat at the desk. He tore a slip from the hotel's stationery and wrote a few lines in a hand he did not usually show to others. He folded the paper and reached into his jacket for a small brass key. He set both the folded note and the key on the desk and pushed them across toward Emma. Emma hesitated with her fingers over the paper. She read the first line and then looked up. "Luca," she said. Her voice carried the name like it had weight. "Why?" she asked. Luca did not answer with an explanation. He answered with an invitation couched as a decision. "You can leave tonight. Take the key. Use the back exit at 3:15 a.m. or stay. I will not hand you to them." He used concrete choices so she could act. She pulled the little brass key into her palm and turned it over. "If I stay, then what?" "Emma." Her voice contained fear folded into calculation. Luca's silence held a map. He had no illusions about safety, only an offer. If you stay, we prepare. If you go, you do not come back to this life." He named options because naming made action possible. They spoke for a short hour. They spoke in phrases more than paragraphs. Luca about the people named in the notebook. "Emma, it's just a list of people I help. Mostly neighbors, small favors. I keep track so I can return things I borrow." Her sentences were simple and quick. She used the names Luca for, and he repeated them to himself until they felt like anchors in a report. He had to keep facts, not feelings, to remain clear. At one point the room's phone buzzed twice with Marco's number, then went silent. Emma's jaw tightened. Marco's men were at my door before. I knew things I didn't," Luca answered with a plan rather than consolation. "We will move the satchel to a safe place. We will make noise about it. We will force him to choose a different leverage point." He spoke with actions, not promises. An unexpected twist arrived when Luca opened the satchel and found a folded photograph tucked into the notebook. The photograph showed a young man in a bakery uniform smiling with flour on his shirt. Emma reached for it. "That's Matteo. He borrowed money and left a note about a debt. I promised him I would help." Luca looked at the picture and then at Emma. The image changed the stakes. It tied Emma to a real person Marco could use. He understood, in concrete terms, what the men had been searching. An alarm sounded 2 floors below the hotel and then died. Someone in the building had triggered a motion sensor and then cut power to the stairwell lights. The external event made both of them jump and reframe the night. Luca checked the window lock and tightened the bolt. He knew where to sit and where not to go. He set the handkerchief around his palm more firmly. They slept in shifts that night. Luca kept one eye on the door and one on the corridor. Emma slept in a chair with the notebook on her lap. She woke once and smoothed the page with her fingers. "Luca, thank you," he answered only with a look. He had never wanted gratitude to be a currency. He wanted safety to be. Before dawn, Luca packed a small bag and left a note of instructions pinned under the lampstand. The note named safe routes, a burner phone number, and a cafe where Emma could wait if the back exit proved compromised. He left his matte black watch on the desk and a line on the paper. "Leave at 3:15. Use the service door. Do not come back here tonight." He used the calendar times and door names because those are the things people could follow without asking questions. At 2:40, 5 a.m., Luca cupped a coffee and listened to the hotel's heating click. He double-checked the door's bolt and then pressed the brass key into Emma's palm. She looked up, her mouth formed a question. "Go. Now, use the service door if you can. Tell Matteo I found his note." She stood so quickly the chair scraped. Her feet were bare on the carpet. Luca watched her cross to the door and slip through the hallway with the purposeful economy of someone trying to keep invisible. He waited at the window with his hand over the pistol in his jacket until he heard the soft scrape of the service door. Then he closed the curtain and slid the bolt. He sat at the desk and stared at the folded photograph until the sky went pale. The night had given him a choice and a wound. Marco's promise of retribution sat like a future appointment on his calendar. A final sound arrived, a single knock on the corridor door. Luca did not move at first. He let the knock be a challenge. Then he opened the door a crack and saw a single envelope dropped into the gap. No one stood in the hall. He took the envelope, slit it open with his thumb, and read 3 words on a cheap index card. "We will wait." Beneath the card was a thin line in ballpoint ink and a time. "Tomorrow, 8. Marco had left his signature in the cadence of a threat. Luca folded the card and put it in his wallet. He had chosen to refuse an order and had paid for that refusal with a small fight and a cut hand. He had offered Emma a path that night and left a brass key on a desk with a short note. The immediate crisis had resolved. She had a place to go and a plan to leave. Yet the chapter ended with a practical, situational hinge, a clear change that demanded action. Marco's men would come again, and the next meeting had a name, a time, and a promise of consequence. He turned off the lamp and sat with the tray of things he had left for her. The hotel clock clicked to 3:01. Luca wrapped the bandage around his palm tighter and placed the note back on the desk, where she could find it later. The chapter closed not with reflection, but with a decision made visible. A brass key, a folded letter, and the knowledge that Marco had set the next meeting for 8 o'clock the following night. Luca slammed the brakes so hard the car rocked and rain spat across the windshield. Betrayal tightened his chest the way a fist tightens a shirt cuff. He watched red lights bloom behind them and set the matte pistol on his thigh with a single, careful motion. "Stay down." he told Emma, voice flat and steady. She pressed her palm to the leather seat and swallowed once, eyes tracking the rear view like a hawk measuring distance. They had no time for gentle plans. The immediate problem sat 3 cars back, 2 headlights and the 6 steady shape of Rossi's sedan waiting with Marco's men. Luca had left the hotel because he could not obey an order he now believed poisoned. His hesitation in the doorway that night, the gun tucked, his step that ate the carpet, was the same fracture that had kept his hand from closing on a trigger before. The memory of that freeze followed him like the taste of metal. He checked the pistol again and glanced at Emma. She held the small leather satchel on her lap like a shield. Emma's breathing was audible in the close car. "What do you want me to do, Luca?" she asked, voice low but clear. She folded her fingers around the satchel strap, then pulled out the recorder and a folded photograph before he could answer. He had seen her hands fidget with the locket in earlier rooms. Now those hands produced proof. The rain on the windows made a soft percussion. Outside, the garage light threw dry noise onto the hood. Luca pushed the starter without turning the key and eased the car forward. He kept his left hand near the pistol and his right hand on the steering column. A part of him catalogued small details. The way Emma's hair clung in damp waves, the olive shadow of his overcoat across the passenger seat, the smell of chamomile under a faint smoke of tobacco near his coat. Those things mattered only because they told him who they were, not who the family said they should be. They rolled into the shadowed bay and cut the engine where the concrete pooled with puddles. Luca opened his door and checked the lot, counting men and cars without letting his face change. Marcos, Lieutenant Rossi, stood at the stairwell entrance with 2 men and the weight of an order behind his jaw. Rossi's face carried its usual scowl. He had the posture of a man who believed everything was calculable. Rossi's voice carried up the concrete stairwell like a dropped stone. "Luca, hand her over." Now his tone left no room for negotiation. Beside him, a broad man Luca recognized as Gallo shifted his weight and tapped the butt of a pistol tucked into his coat. Luca stepped out, closed the door, and left the pistol on the passenger seat while both hands remained visible. He kept his palms open. "Marco sent you," he asked. "Marco sent orders?" Rossi answered. "Hand the woman over. It's not your call." He looked at Emma once, and the look was a ledger closing. Emma did not stand. She kept the satchel tight to her chest and tilted her head as if listening for a word she might not yet have heard. Luca moved so slowly that it read like calm, but every breath measured the distance between them and the stairwell the men guarded. Doubt shifted into a sharper edge. He remembered the hesitation in the hotel doorway when she had spoken, and he could not erase that break in him. The way she had said a single sentence, plain, steady, had made his decision tremble. Rossi stepped forward. "Luca, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. You're in the middle now." He named nothing more. He thrust his chin. "Marco's tired of loose ends." "Give her up." Emma's eyes flicked to Luca. "He's lying," she said. "Marco lied about why I was marked. I recorded it." She unfolded the photograph and set it on the leather between them. The photo showed Marco in a dim office, a ledger in hand, and Rossi at his side. Luca saw numbers on the paper, a crossed-out column, a hand, Marcos pointing at a sum. Silence cut the low hum of the garage. A henchman near Rossi shifted, and the metallic whisper of a weapon slid into hearing. Luca's head counted the options. Hand her over and obey, refuse and fight, or find leverage. The betrayal he felt was not only Marco's to him. It was a betrayal of the structure that had been his life. For a man who lived by codes, discovery that the family's orders covered embezzlement felt like a splinter in his spine. Marco's voice arrived as a text ping. Rossi's phone lit and Luca watched the screen like a slow compass. He did not need to read the message to know what it would say. The phone vibrated again. Rossi glanced down and the hard line of his mouth shifted. The henchman Gallo hesitated as his thumb brushed the leather grip of his weapon. "So, Rossi?" eyes narrowing. "What are you doing with a recorder?" His suspicion cut at Emma more than an accusation. He took a step closer. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Emma pushed the recorder toward Rossi with both hands. "Listen to the file," she said. It has Marco's voice. He says he ordered the hit to cover missing money. He says it out loud. She pressed the tiny button on the device as if pressing a detonator. Luca watched Rossi's pupils narrow when the playback crackled against the cold concrete. Marco's voice filled the small stretch between cars with a clipped tone. "Move the transfers. Burn the paper. Make it look like collateral damage." No questions. The recording listed account numbers and a date. It named sums. It named a safe code. The men around Rossi heard the words and looked at Rossi like they had been punched. Rossi's jaw worked. "That's a fake," he snapped. "Where did you get that?" He jabbed a finger at Emma. "You planted this." Emma did not flinch. Gallo saw Marco sign the transfer. Salvatore saw the ledger. "I recorded it in the office when I went to collect the old invoices for my shop." She the shop name cleanly. She named the day and the hour. "I know the safe code because Marco left the ledger open. I kept a copy. I can hand them to the right people." Her voice held no pleading. It held inventory. Rossi barked a laugh that resembled a cough. "The right people. Who would that be?" "The cops." "You came to Luca. You think the family won tea." He did not finish. A thin vein jumped at his temple. Gallo shifted again, and the henchman Salvatore, who had stood tight by the stairwell, dragged his eyes from the pistol to Marco's phone, then back to Rossi. The hesitation spread like a cold that would not heal. Salvatore's fingers trembled on his holster. Luca moved forward then, a foot at a time, hands still open. He remembered doing this before, the slow advance that rid as caution, but carried intent. "Rossi," he said, "I will not walk away blind. You know me. You know what I do. If Marco ordered this to cover his debts, you will hear the truth. Not from rumors. From your phone and from men who were in the room." Rossi spat. "You betray the family, Luca. You betray Marco. You betray everything. You sure you want that?" He looked at Salvatore for confirmation. Salvatore swallowed and looked down at the puddle at his feet. The first emotion shift arrived through action. Doubt that Luca could do what Marco wanted turned to immediate fear as Rossi signaled a move. The henchmen readied themselves. A pistol appeared, briefly, at Rossi's hip. Luca's fingers slid to the seat to his pistol, then paused. He did not draw. He chose a different path. Marco's orders are not sacred when they recriminal. "Luca, if you want to kill me, do it. But if you want to keep men, you listen to recorder." He reached into the car and lifted the photograph closer so Rossi could see the signatures. "Look." Rossi stepped in and took the photo between gloved fingers. He studied the handwriting, then the ledger numbers. He grew paler around the mouth. "This is—" He did not finish. Salvatore moved like a man unmoored. "I was there," he said suddenly. "Yes, the transfers were real. He me to move money. I put it through. I can say it." Rossi's eyes flicked to Salvatore as if the man had offered a choice between two knives. He barked at Salvatore. "You shut up. You never speak unless I tell you." Salvatore kept talking. "I saw the ledger. Marco's handwriting." He jabbed his chin toward the office, then toward Luca's car, then at Marco himself. He'd cover me if I handled the move." Rossi's posture faltered. The group's balance shifted. One man, Gallo, looked at Marco's contact on his phone and then at Rossi. The silence stretched until it had weight. An external event broke it. Rossi's phone received a second message, time-stamped earlier than expected. The screen flashed a bank transfer confirmation and a line of text that made Rossi's scowl deepen into something rawer. Luca pressed the pistol flat against his thigh but kept his hands visible. "Listen to him, Rossi. Decide what you want. Loyalty to a man or loyalty to the family. You're either one who answers to the ledger." He ledger as if it were a living thing, and the men understood the meaning. Rossi snapped back. "So you choose me over Marco. You think you can fix this?" He took a step closer and hissed. "You are choosing the wrong side." Back and forth followed. The argument went quick, each line a blade. Rossi listened to Salvatore. He was in the office. Luca, Salvatore lies for money. Rossi shot. No, Salvatore, I didn't lie. I signed. I moved the money. He looked at Rossi and then at Marco. You me too. Rossi clenched his jaw and his voice dropped. Marco says you're a traitor. Salvatore. He reached for his radio. Salvatore shoved the radio back into Rossi's hand. No, I will tell the truth. I am tired of covering things I done. Understand? The second emotion shift occurred. Fear became clarity for some of the men. Their faces tightened, but their eyes cleared when the ledger and the recording stacked into a pattern they could not erase. Luca felt a different current in him. Something like relief and dread braided together. He took advantage of the moment. Nobody moves, Luca ordered, and his voice left no argument. He stepped between Rossi and Marco's line of power like a man bracing a breach. He reached for Emma's satchel and set the recorder and photograph on the hood of his car where everyone could see them. Small action spoke. He placed the recorder on the metal with deliberate care, the way a surgeon sets an instrument. If you want answers, listen to the file and call the numbers it mentions. Rossi's hand hovered over his phone. He hit play. Marco's voice listed sums and accounts and times. He mentioned a safe in a downtown office and a morning courier with a briefcase. The air felt clipped by the details. Men exchanged looks that no longer belonged solely to Marco. If Marco had ordered the hit to hide theft, the order had become a liability. Marco's name arrived finally in the mouth of a man who still respected Chain. Rossi lowered his phone and spoke into the concrete. Marco, he said. The word like a challenge. Explain this. There was no voice from Marco. There was a silence that held its own weight. Then Luca saw the opening he needed. He moved like water finding a leak. He stepped toward Rossi and added, "We can handle this without blood if we expose it cleanly. We can remove the rot and keep the rest. If you kill Emma, you kill the chance to show the ledger and the transfers. You lose men. You lose credibility." Rossi's hand shook as he put the phone away. He ran a thumb over the screen and looked at the ledger photo again. His face did not show tears. It showed calculation. The choice in front of him was not a moral one, but a practical one. That reality forced the fracture between old codes and the new evidence. The external event that raised stakes came when one of Rossi's men, Gallo, took a step back and dropped his gaze to the wet floor. He made no move to draw. Salvatore stood up straighter and said, "I can go with Luca. I don't want to kill for accounts I can see. I don't want that on my soul." He named soul in a simple line. The admission was small, concrete, and it changed the room. Rossi barked, then laughed hollowly. "Who do you think you are, Salvatore? You walk with Luca, and you think you will be spared." He looked at Luca as if the man had offered a rotten coin. Luca answered without hesitation, "I offer a choice. Either you follow Marco into ruin, or you follow a truth that might save men. Which is it?" He kept his voice steady. The tension there was not a metaphor, but muscle. Rossi hesitated. The henchmen glanced at one another. The ledger on Luca's hood caught one of the garage lights and reflected a thin bar of light across the concrete. The recording stopped when Rossi's thumb hit the button, and everyone listened to the echo it left. Suddenly, a movement from above, the stairwell door swinging, announced fresh danger. A second group of black coats moved down the stairs, faces unreadable in the dim. Marco had sent reinforcement, or perhaps Marco himself. The arrival was a mini cliffhanger that tightened the chamber. It forced decisions faster. Rossi's head flipped toward the descending men. "Who's coming now?" He barked. He looked frantic for the first time. Luca's muscles went tight. This escalation meant the room would split by action, not words. The climax arrived when the stairwell men pushed into the bay and Marco emerged from behind them. Not from the phone, but in flesh. He did not look like a man surprised. He looked like a man who had intended this. Blood had not yet been spilled, but presence alone bore threat. Marco's hand brushed the pocket where a cigarette might be. His mouth curved with a practiced smile. Luca, Marco, his voice slow and even, you always were sentimental. Give her up, walk away. Luca didn't speak at first. He stepped between Emma and Marco. He glanced at Rossi, at Salvatore, at Gallo. Stand down, he said. Marco barked a laugh that meant knives. Stand down. You think you can stand in front of me? You think you can choose your family? He stepped closer to Luca and reached for Rossi's shoulder like a man confirming a pact. Rossi jerked but did not move his hand to his weapon. The hesitation spread, measurable. A twitch, a breath held. Marco's closest man, sharp, faced loyal, lashed out at Luca with a short swing to disarm him. Luca answered with a controlled motion born of years of practice. He cuffed the man, forced him down, and disarmed him in one clean move. The scuffle lasted a handful of seconds, but every second bore down like iron. Emma watched with her hands pressed together. Her mouth was a thin line. She did not step back. When Luca pushed Marco's man to the ground, the henchmen moved to separate. Salvatore stepped in a different direction. He raised his hand and said, simple and heavy, I want kill for this. Marco's face changed then, but not with fury. It changed with calculation cracking into panic. He pushed a shoulder into Rossi and said, low and dangerous, kill him. Now, the sound of that one syllable, an order, made the men around him twitch toward action. Luca's pistol flashed into his hand like lightning because action had to match choice. He did not aim at Emma. He aimed at Marco's closest man who had sprung. He fired once into the air to silence the chaos. The sound cracked and echoed off concrete. Men dropped to instinct, eyes wide. Rossi staggered back from the sudden violence and the evidence before him. His face broke in a way that made every man in the bay understand the cost. Marco, he said, and for the first time in the night, the name sounded like a plea. Marco stumbled, wounded by the turn of the room. The man at his side crumpled with a pulled groan. Luca held the pistol steady on the fallen man and then on Marco. He thought of killing him in a neat sentence, to end the rot, and then he thought of the ledger, the recorder, and the men who needed choices. He let the firing position lower. The decision was a pivot, exile or death. Luca felt the old code press against his ribs and then loosen as if a seam had been cut. He put the pistol away and stepped forward to cuff Marco's wrist, where the man's signet ring flashed. He pushed Marco's shoulder and said, "You're going to answer for this. Not here. Not like this." Marco laughed once, a thin sound. "Who will hold you to it?" he sneered. Luca answered by tossing the recorder into Marco's lap. "The tape will hold you. The men who signed your ledger will hold you. You made the family small by making it criminal. You left choices for men like Salvatore, and he chose one outside. Rain had started in earnest. The garage door was open to the wet world. Salvatore stepped forward and placed his hand on Marco's arm. Rossi exhaled like a man finally allowing a weight to drop. They bound Marco's hands with a strip of leather taken from a jacket. They took his phone and his watch and his signet. Luca watched them do it, every motion a claim against what Marco had thought untouchable. The barnacled forms of loyalty shifted that night because men made small concrete motions. A man placing his hand on another's shoulder, a recorded voice proving a crime, a ledger with numbers that could be followed to the bank. When the men scattered, Luca helped Emma into the passenger seat and started the car. They left Marco in the bay surrounded by men whose allegiance had cracked. The escape was messy and quick. They drove out into the rain and the city lights dissolved like punctured coins. Luca kept his eyes on the road and the pistol under the seat as if it were both a promise and a threat. The drive to the dim hotel was a slow descent. Rain cleansed the windshield but not the night stain. Emma put the recorder and the folded letter on the low table in the room. She set the brass key beside them with hands that did not tremble but did not relax. Luca sat on the chair and watched, measuring the small arrangements as if they were the map of what came next. They spoke little. Emma's voice came out in short sentences. "I recorded it so someone would hear. I kept the copy because I couldn't trust anyone. Marco was getting bolder. I thought if I could show the ledger. She stopped, fingers worrying the edge of the letter. I thought I could make them listen. Luca leaned forward. You did the right thing in a way that will make men angry. There will be consequences. Emma met his eyes. What will you do? She asked. He put the brass key in his palm and turned it slowly. I will keep you safe for now. We'll present the ledger where it matters. We will find men who still care about order, not cover-ups. There will be men who hate me for taking this stance. There will be men who respect it. The room hummed with the refrigerator, the rain, the recorded hiss from the device on the table. Luca reached across and pressed play. Marco's voice filled the small space, naming sums and telling men to burn paper. The hearing of it changed the room's air into evidence. Emma sat down and folded her hands in her lap. Salvatore's name in the recording cut a path through the night's fear into clarity. They made a plan. Call one man who still had loyalty to codified order. Bring the tape to a lawyer who would keep it sealed until the family chose to act, and move evidence to a safe place. They would not pretend the family would not retaliate. Luca would not pretend he had answers for what would come next. But they had a ledger, a recording, and a man who had chosen not to kill. Those things were small and concrete, and they mattered. Hours passed as they compiled what they had. Luca tied a neat knot with a strip of cloth and wrapped the photograph and the recorder together. Emma wrote down dates and names in a small, cramped script and slid the paper into the letter. The brass key sat on the desk like a promise. Luca set his fingers on it the way a man touches a navigation point. At dawn, the city's light blurred a pale edge through the curtains. Luca stood at the window and watched men move in small streams below. He thought of Marco in the garage and of Rossi, who had held the ledger and not struck. He thought of Salvatore and how a single admission had shifted the room. He tallied the costs. Men who would resent him, a family fractured, danger that would not sleep. He also counted the rewards. Truth in a recording, a photograph, a man willing to speak. Emma came to the window and stood beside him. She put a hand on his arm, a small, human contact that did not need words. What happens now? She asked. Luca looked down at the brass key in his hand, and then at the recorder and the folded letter on the table. He folded his thumb over the key and made a decision he had not permitted himself earlier. He would not hand the woman he had been ordered to kill to a man who used murder to cover theft. He would not become a keeper of lies. He turned and picked up the letter. We take this to the lawyer today. He said, we make a choice that leaves nothing to rumor. We make evidence and we hold men to it. Emma exhaled and nodded. And if they come for us? She asked. Luca set the brass key on the table and tapped it with his knuckles. Then we prepare to meet them with truth. He did not say they would be safe. He did not promise a future. He offered a method, facts, names, and a record. They packed the recorder and the ledger into the satchel and folded the letter into a pocket. Luca slid the brass key into his palm as they left the room. He closed the door behind them and locked it. The click of the lock was a small, concrete sound that ended the chapter's immediate motion. Outside, the rain had softened into a mist. Luca put Emma into the car and started the engine. He glanced at her once and saw the gentle dimple appear when she tried to smile. It was one of the few things in the night that felt steady. As they pulled away, Luca's phone buzzed. He ignored it until they passed the hotel sign. Then he tapped the screen and read a short message from Rossi. We kept him. We will bring proof where it matters. Rossi's name appeared like a tether, a man who had chosen something different. Luca did not reply. He slipped the brass key into his inner pocket and set his hand on Emma's satchel where the recorder sat. He thought of the ledger and the men who had been forced to choose. He thought of Marco's belligerent arrogance that night and the way the family could break when its head chose greed over order. He thought of Salvatore's hard, small line. I want to kill for this, That line had shifted more than a conversation. It had altered the path. They drove into the grey morning with concrete plans. A lawyer who kept secrets, a list of men who would be called to testify, and a promise that the ledger and the recording would not be buried. Their city unrolled in front of them not as a metaphor but as streets, lights, and wet asphalt. They had choices to make and enemies to manage. The night's betrayal had become evidence. The evidence demanded action. At the hotel's dim desk, Luca pulled the folded letter free and slid the brass key beside it once more as he handed the recorder to Emma. She traced the small brass edge with her thumb and closed her fingers over it. "Steady, we did this because we had to survive," she said. Luca nodded. "Yes. We survived it by naming it." He left the garage and the wet concrete behind, but not the men they had faced. He counted names to himself. Marco Vital, who had ordered the hit, Rossi, who had chosen to hear, Salvatore, who had refused to kill, Emma Hayes, who had recorded and kept proof, Luca Moretti, who had refused to obey without question. The names were anchors. They carried weight. They would be used in courtrooms and in quiet rooms where men made decisions. They would be used to balance debts and loyalties. He turned the brass key in his palm one last time before tucking it into his inner pocket and said to Emma, quietly, "Stay close. Don't leave the safe places. Trust the lawyer, trust Rossi where he can be trusted, and trust myself in this." Emma kept her hand on the recorder and nodded. She did not say she trusted him fully, only that she relied on the facts they now held. The room felt like a small vessel tied to a shore. They stepped into the rain together. Luca locked the hotel door behind them with the hotel key and the sound clicked tight. That click was the last concrete action of the chapter. A door closed, evidence set into motion, and a decision made that would bind them to a dangerous but honest path. The recorder hummed quietly in Emma's satchel, and Luca drove them toward the lawyer's office with the brass key safe against his heart.